Welcome to the Chorus in the Chaos Podcast. My name is Jack, and I am, as always, well, not as always, because we've had a little bit of a break here in season 2, but middle of season 2, but we're back. All three of us are back for one final mid-season bonus episode. I'm here with Blake and Grayson, and this should be a fun episode. Usually we have a detailed outline of all the stuff we want to say, minus a few jokes here and there. Today there's no outline.
Right.
No outline. No outline. What we have done is independently, we've not shared the information, mostly, but we've selected 5 books, right? Each of us independently, 5 books that we think every Christian should read. Like if you could force a Christian to read 5 books, here would be the 5 books that each of us would pick.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about it, so
No,
we were purposeful on choosing, 5 books, and so we'll see. There might be some bleed over. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Should be exciting. So the premise, 5 books. If you could force every Christian to read them, what would they be? So
yeah. And
did you have any criteria in picking yours, Jack? Like, was there any filter that you were running? Because obviously it's tough to narrow 5 books down.
Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts going through my head. I had, books that impacted me the most, books that I think are, just have been insanely beneficial for Christendom, right? Like the esteem of them and the widespread accolade of them.
Okay.
I did have a moment where I thought about trolling you two, that it might be funny to pick a book just to mess with you two. That did happen.
That did happen.
I thought better of it.
Spoiler, that's 4 out of 5 of them.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know. I had all 3 of those. Ultimately, I kind of settled on a mixture of the group of them.
A healthy blend.
Yeah. But before we go any further, because I don't want to get too far and forget this, a good friend of the podcast who wished to remain anonymous sent us a handful of these books. He paid for them, and he even sent, and it's unbelievably generous, sent a little bit of cash along with the books to me to help cover shipping for our listeners as a quick giveaway here. So this is The Heart of the Reformation. It's a 90-day devotional on the 5 solas. It was a book that, it kind of in the spirit of what we're doing today, it was a book that impacted him quite a bit. He wanted it was like a $5 Friday thing, and he was like, hey, I want to give these out to people. So he bought them, sent them to us, and later in the episode, Blake is going to give you the key word.
The secret word.
The secret
in
word.
The comments.
And the first
the
person,
word guy.
He's the word guy. The first person to then type the word in
the
YouTube,
comments of the YouTube section.
We'll reach out to you. We'll get an address, and we will send you one of these books. So thank you, anonymous donor.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing that, Grayson. No, it wasn't Grayson.
It was not a secret.
No, my heavenly reward. Grayson, what were your criteria for the books that you chose?
Well, mine were largely ones that were just personally impactful at various points in my Christian walk. One of them is one that I've taught through a couple times, and so the more and more that I've taught through it, the more I've enjoyed that book. Another one, as I was considering Just a Call to Ministry, was incredibly impactful. And then the other ones are more, devotional style, and it was hard points in life, I guess, or just different points where I was studying something theologically in seminary, and yet for whatever reason, it was not a point of devotion, where it was just a dry season and a hard one.
Gotcha.
So I had a hard time in one way, because I was trying to think of, what are books I could force everyone to read? And one of them, I'm like, that's a 400-page book, but
right.
If I could force you.
Yeah, right. Heavy emphasis on the force. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Blake?
So I had narrowed it down to 11 books, and then out of that 11, I did kind of split it into 2 categories. So the ones I'm presenting tonight, I would say most personally impactful in my Christian life. The other ones, though there is a little bit of crossover, the other ones were more like formative kind of things. So theologically shaping versus maybe like devotional and growing. And so I'm going to kind of course, I still have them all sitting here, so I may do some switch over as we're talking.
Blake goes into monologue mode.
Right.
So, book number 27.
Right. Number 25, yeah. So, who wants to go first? Who wants to present the first book of the night? Show us the book, tell us about it, tell us why you like it, and we'll go along.
I nominate Grayson.
All right.
Okay. I second.
My first choice then was The Bruised Reed by Burroughs.
Oh, yeah.
Or actually not Burroughs. Gosh, I'm thinking of a different book already, but Richard Sibbs. So that book, I remember reading it probably 5 or 6 years just into being a Christian, and we were going through hard times at various points with, I don't want to get into all the details, but just some relationships that were around us were starting to crumble, and my own sin was just heavy on my heart. And I was recommended it by a pastor friend at that time who just said, why don't you just pick this up? He's like, you sound like you're not a guy who's trying to just, get knee deep into sin. You're literally just struggling. So for me, it was instrumental in just being able to recognize there are times where you go through that, to use an old phrase, dark night of the soul, where you can listen all day long to the attacks of the enemy. You can listen to the attacks of even not so well-meaning people, but at the end of the day, when you are grounded in Christ, he will not crush the bruised reed, right? I mean, that's the whole point of Sibbs's work, is that he lifts up the downcast and the weary, the weary-hearted, the heavy laden. He says to all, come to me and you shall find rest. And being able to simply rest in that fact that though I'm a sinner, and a great one at that, and though I might screw up all sorts of different relationships at different points, things I could have done better, things maybe I think I did well, but it was instrumental during that time of just being able to reflect on the fact that my Heavenly Father will never leave me, nor forsake me, nor crush me. And even when I'm afflicted, he does so with the utmost purpose of showing his love and his grace and kindness to me.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. And that's a great book. Great book, for sure. Jack, what's your number 1?
Numero uno. Hang on, I got to reach over here and grab it. Got a stack.
Just pulls out this monstrous book of.
Here's my set of Reformed Dogmatics. I don't know if you heard of it.
Yeah.
We did an entire podcast basically on this book. So anyone who listens to the podcast could probably guess that this was going to be on it. Blake is smiling. So Blake and Grayson were texting each other the books that they thought I would have, and I'm almost certain this one was on there.
I didn't put it on there.
No. Really?
No.
Oh my goodness.
No.
Oh my goodness. Well, this book, if you missed our episode, season 2 on contentment, we talk in detail about the issue, and this book comes up a lot.
Right.
But for me, I read this book every year, every other year. I've read it a number of times, and it's just an incredible book. Helping Christians, myself, and specifically speaking to that, in a personal sense, understand what it is to be content in Christ and how that really impacts you. It changes your life. Understand to be content in the gospel, to be content in the work that Christ has done. I think our episode, I think we called it the superpower of Christian contentment, because it's this unique, truly a unique thing that only those in Christ can truly understand and benefit from. Yeah. Like the world can be falling apart around you, and I'm not saying it's easy, right? But it's deep inside you, there's this contentment. It's a rock. You're leaning on the rock of ages. But incredible book. Anyone struggling out there with anything, or if you're not struggling, you will at some point.
Right. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, Psalm 34 says.
Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment, Jeremiah Burroughs. Buy it, read it regularly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
A very approachable Puritan, too. So if you're not used to reading the Puritans, great one. So my first book on top of my stack, this is, I don't know if you've heard of this one, The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment by Jeremiah Burroughs.
It's funny. I was actually going to grab that one, and I switched it out for The Bruised Reed, and I'm like, no, we did talk a full podcast on this one. Basically, I was like, what? It's so good.
Right.
So
The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment, I mean, everything that Jack just said, I could just say ditto, or I did, point out, I mean, again, if me personally, several seasons of my life struggling with contentment. This is one of my most frequently read books as well, because it's just really good reminders. And it's a really great, it kind of throws the brakes on discontentment when you start feeling sorry about yourself, or things like that, or an ungodly unsettledness. Yeah. It is a wonderful, wonderful book. And again, we talked about it extensively. If you haven't picked this up, you really, really should. So that's my 1 of 5.
Yeah. I like that.
Moving on.
That's a good pick.
That's a good pick. Yeah. See,
it's
now I'm the outsider. I'm like, well, I should have grabbed it. Guess I didn't. It's
well, now here's your chance.
All the same books, aren't we?
I've mastered contentment.
Right. You don't need
you
it
actually
anymore.
wrote the book on contentment.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Burroughs wrote the foreword for Grayson's book on contentment posthumously.
Little known fact, I've been alive for ages at this point.
Grayson, what's book 2?
Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. This one is
never read that.
Actually a fantastic little book. It's incredibly accessible. Most people, when they think Trinitarianism, they think heady theological work that I'm not going to understand, right? Or I'm going to struggle all the way through it. This one is actually very, very accessible. But the thing I appreciated about it most was, so I was reading, tomes on the Trinity in seminary at this time. And another one that was just recommended to me because it was just thick, dry literature. And it wasn't bad, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, so I know that in my studies, there's aspects of it where you're just trying to get through it. But at the same time, I'd like to actually pull away some spiritual sustenance from it, right?
Yeah.
So this book actually did that for me. In every which way, Reeves took it and he turned it to a point where you could now think about an aspect of the triune character of God or one of the members of the Trinity and simply be able to turn that into praise or thanksgiving, or he had a way of just crafting the theological truth in such a way where your heart soared as you read it. And no other book on the Trinity has actually done that for me. Wow, but it's very clear. He's a concise writer, and so it was never difficult to track with him. And best of all, there's no heretical stuff in there too. He's solid on it.
So he uses the water analogy a lot.
Right. Yeah, the Trinity is like the water. It's the frozen thing. I wonder if any Christian meme thing has made as much impact as that Lutheran Donald and Connell video of the Trinitarian of the Trinity. Because it doesn't even matter who you are, what your denomination is. Almost everybody has watched that video.
Yep.
That's true.
I've literally heard people in public that I don't know that are like, that's modalism, Patrick.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh,
right.
Instant friend.
Yeah, exactly. Until you find out they're Lutherans, then you don't want to play anymore.
Of course.
Yeah, take my ball and go
Lutheran
home.
Listeners.
Well.
those kind
of things make Jack uncomfortable.
Yeah, he's like, "Would you stop
doesn't
it,
make
Baptists?"
Independent Baptists, all right.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
So, you know what doesn't make me uncomfortable?
What?
The Institutes of the Christian Religion by John Calvin.
See?
Which would be book 2.
Yeah.
This one hits both. For me, the criteria, personally affected, just kind of wide accolade. To me, this checks both boxes. Yeah. It's essentially a systematic theology book, but it's incredibly readable, surprisingly readable if you ever sit down and do it. I think it can be a little daunting because it's big.
Right.
But one of the things that I tell people, because Calvin, oops, sorry, I bumped the mic there. Calvin gets a lot of flack for being this heady guy, and
right.
He's so much more approachable than people think.
Yep.
Right.
And he's so much more devotional. I know I didn't put it in here, but his work on the Psalms, if you've ever read his commentary on the Psalms, it's some of the best devotional material I've ever, it's incredible.
Right.
Well, there's
so
another one he
approachable.
wrote.
Yeah.
I think it's like a little book on the Christian life, and it is just a little book, but absolutely wonderfully pastoral on every single page.
He gets such a knack for just being this heady guy, and at the heart of it, he was a pastor first. Like he was a theologian, but he was a pastor first. And people miss that about him. And he wrote this book. I mean, Institutes of the Christian Religion. He wrote it for people so that they could understand the Christian religion. It was a pastoral attempt to summarize the doctrines of the faith to help people. Like it wasn't just this, I'm going to write a long book for the sake of writing a long book. Right. It was intended to be practical.
Mm-hmm.
So
anyway, that's a great pick. That's a great pick. Second book on my pile. This one has been both devotional and formative, probably one of the most impacting books, and it's just barely over 100 pages. Call the Sabbath a Delight by Walter Chantry. It's about the Lord's Day and the New Testament view of the Lord's Day. This book utterly rocked my world. This is what moved me from thinking that Sunday was a second Saturday to actually having a full biblical view of the Lord's Day. Very approachable. Again, it's just over 100 pages. Really, really, really fantastic little book. In fact, when people ask me about like my views of the Lord's Day and things like that, which is we're big on that. Like we're big on church attendance and the sacredness of the day and all of those things. A lot of that formation in my mind was through Walter Chantry. And then another little pro tip, and I think these guys would agree with me. When you go to I frequent used bookstores. One of my strategies is it's when you're looking at, the binding of all these books, if you're not looking for something specific, it can be hard to just, you got Rick Warren mixed in with, all these other guys and stuff like that you're trying to scam. One thing that I like to do, a little pro tip, basically anything from Banner of Truth is a purchase. If you don't have it, basically anything from Banner of Truth is a purchase. And what you have to do is you just look for that little Whitfield on the binder there. And so I'm always scanning for that little guy when I'm at the used bookstore. And sometimes there'll even be copies of stuff cheap that I already have, and I'll pick it up just so that I can give it away to somebody. So little used bookstore pro tip there. So anyway, my second book, Call the Sabbath a Delight, Walter Chantry.
That's good. I've never read that. I'll have to pick that up.
It's so good. Yeah. You would like it. You would like it.
I bet I would.
He makes one of the things is he makes a really compelling argument for the Sabbath day being changed to the Lord's Day, to Sunday. It is a reference of the new Sabbath, essentially. Yeah. And he does it pretty well. He lays it out pretty well. So that's a good read for sure.
That's good. All right. So coming in number 3 then for me would be this book, this gem, Help Heavenward by Octavius Winslow. One of my favorite books of all time. I
have not read it.
It is so, so good. Anything by Octavius Winslow, I will automatically buy. So, like you say, you look for the Banner of Truth logo. I do that too. I look for Winslow though too, or if I see it, I'm like, I'll snatch it up.
What bookstores are you guys going to where you find like Banner of Truth?
I don't really
it's rare. Yeah, it's not like there's so many Banner of Truth books here. I can't carry all.
What section of Barnes and Noble is that? Because I
know.
It's right next to the
your
occult
best
section.
shot. Your best shot's like a used bookstore for that kind of thing.
Because
sometimes I've found that people will like. Actually, I was just at the used bookstore the other day, and there was a guy whose father passed away that was a Christian, and he just wanted to dump all the books off at the used bookstore, because he didn't want them. I mean, there's hundreds of books. And every once in a while in there, you can find, even if it's accidental, you can find gems in there. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Grayson.
No, you're fine. I've done that at estate sales every once in a while, too.
Right.
The saddest estate sale I went to was for a pastor, and I went there and didn't walk out with a single book because all of them were just garbage. And I'm like,
I remember you saying. I remember when that happened.
That happened to me like 3 weeks ago, and I picked up a book that I thought I would give You know what? I'm going to go get this book. It's right
and it's
over
going to
there.
be my
You
number
can't-
3, and you're going to have to listen to it.
No,
Right.
the listeners should know about this. They should know about this. Hang on, Grayson.
In the interim,
Actually, Grayson,
well,
finish.
I was going to
Yes.
say, you go grab that book, and I'll talk about Help Heavenward just a little bit.
All right. I will be
All right.
right back.
Is there any way we can just kick him off? He's going to come back and hear that and be like, oh, gosh.
Yeah.
So Help Heavenward, utterly fantastic. The premise behind it is that in just the everyday weakness of the Christian life, you lose sight of Christ. And so I found myself literally being carried up to a point where I was, again, my heart was soaring, my mind was soaring, and just being reminded of all that Christ has done, who Christ is, what he has promised to do. And I don't even know how the heck I got there half the time. I would have to go back and reread like 5 pages just to see how he carried me from one point
Right.
all of a sudden to I'm worshiping as my son's cutting the grass and I'm just sitting on the lawn at the same time watching him go back and forth.
Right.
But it was an utterly fantastic read. He goes through in various aspects of the Christian life as far as backsliding, depression, all those. I mean, literally whatever stage of life you might find yourself in, even in what you and I might call a good state. He makes the argument that you can always continually think more of your heavenly master, and you can always lean more upon Christ, but you need Christ's very help in other words, to actually get to that point where you are thinking of your Lord. So it's, I mean, intrinsically devotional, but at the same time, he is a great way of just carrying you along theologically too. So
Grayson, you recommend, so about 3 or 4 years ago, we were going through a hard time just individually. We had church, we were changing churches, I was changing jobs, our kids were changing school. Like there was just this turmoil for about 6 months of my life. And you and I were talking, you recommended that book to me and I bought it and read it. It was fantastic.
I'm going to have to add it. I'm going to have to put it on my to-do list.
So
how big is that book, Grayson? It seemed like it was pretty...
It's pretty manageable. I want to say, I mean, you're 180 pages.
Oh,
so.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
All right. So a few weeks ago,
Intermission.
true story.
This is Jack's
Intermission for
3.
Jack to complain about his friends.
I was at an estate sale that was for a pastor.
Yeah.
And I was
What
like,
kind of
texting
pastor was he?
He was not a good, well, I don't know if he was a faithful pastor or not. He didn't have a very good book selection.
Gotcha.
So, and it was like, I walked in there and when I saw like what was going on, I was like, this could be a gold mine. Unfortunately, it was not. There was like a handful of books, but I saw this one set and it was this lovely set of books here. And I saw this and I thought, I bet Grayson or Blake would love this. Like I said, I thought to myself, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to buy this, and whichever one really wants it, I'm going to mail it to them.
I have an idea,
so
Jack. I have an idea.
I bought
Don't
Book
show it.
away.
Let's
the
give it away.
the Encyclopedia of Southern Baptist. And I thought, hey, they're Baptist. I bet they would love this.
Baptists love Baptist phone book.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
It's a 2-part. It's got a box. Look how nice that is.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, look what I got. Would one of you guys want it? Like, no. And
Jack,
now I'm
the
like,
moral story is
no
Jack would have
explanation
rather had
either.
us. Jack would have
He
rather
didn't
had
say
us
anything.
lie to him to save his feelings.
but now I have this thing and I have no idea what to do with it.
Jack, why don't you mail that out to
Right.
me and I'll throw it out for you.
Yeah, right. Wait, Jack, what is it called again?
It's the Encyclopedia of Southern Baptist.
Okay, that is the secret word. The Encyclopedia of Southern Baptists. Put that in the comments. If you're the first one, we'll reach out to you. Jack will send you a 90-day devotional as well as a copy of the Southern Baptist directory or whatever it's called.
I'm not sending that. That'll cost like $50. No one wants it.
Right.
It was only like $2, so I'm really not mad.
Yeah.
But I really did think one of you guys would want it. I think, oh, that'd look cool on a shelf. But
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I'm
that's what happens
sorry,
when you're
Jack.
friends with Baptist.
I guess.
That's what
Poor
happens.
taste, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
Yep. Well, what's your third book, Jack?
Is it my turn? Okay.
Yeah.
Mortification of Sin.
Yep.
John Owen, fantastic. We did another episode that touched on this quite a bit.
My favorite Baptist, John Owen.
Yeah. It's debatable. But great book. Struggling with sin. I mean, it takes the seriousness of sin. It highlights the ugliness of sin and the importance of what it means to kill it, why it's so significant, how to do it. It's practical.
Right.
Really important book. It's another book I read not as frequently as Rare Jewel, but I've read it maybe every 3 to 5 years. I pull this one out. I think I've read it 3, 4, 5 times. Like that.
Right. So. Yeah. Fantastic choice.
Yeah. Very good book.
My third book, Spiritual Depression, Its Causes and Its Cure by Martin Lloyd-Jones, has been an incredibly helpful book for me. This is actually a collection kind of cut together of 21 sermons that he did. And really the thrust of the book is how to spiritually attack joylessness. And that Christian joy is an earmark of being a Christian. And yet so many Christians walk around depressed. Now, I know, of course, depression is a hot button topic, and I've got some hot takes on it. But this is just, again, it has been incredibly beneficial for my soul. Martin Lloyd-Jones is very, very thorough. If you've ever read any of his stuff, and just really good. He just had a way of putting things, particularly with Christian joy, that have been wonderfully helpful to me. So if you battle with feeling down or depressed or worthless or any of those things, this is a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'll second that one. That is an incredible book. Very, very good. It's not on my list, but it's one that easily could be. Like if you asked me,
if we did like a top 20 list, we would probably have a lot of. Yeah. Next episode, top 50 books.
Yeah. All right, my number 4 then, also Martin Lloyd-Jones, is Preaching and Preachers.
Yeah.
So this one, it's born out of a series of lectures that he gave to his students at Westminster way back when, but they took the transcripts of it and put it together in a compilation for the book. There's also supplemental material as he fine-tuned things while he was still alive in the original version of it, but just a fantastic book that, I mean, if you're looking to get into pastoral ministry and preaching, it should be on your shelf, and you should read it, just simply because it speaks of the sobriety and the holiness of the task, but in a way that Lloyd-Jones could only do. I mean, he was a physician, so he is able to cut past a lot of the I'll be slightly crass, the theological bullcrap that can be put out by so many, and
which he was dealing with. I mean, when he wrote Preaching and Preachers, that was a crazy take for his time period and his place. I mean, to view, while there were so many in England at the time, or the UK, sliding toward liberalism and everything, like he was like one of the guys that was like, no, we need to take it back the other way. So it is a very impacting book now, but in its time, it was like earth shattering.
Oh yeah. Yep. But it's well worth a read.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Yep, it's one I revisit every so often, just again to, for one, remind myself of what I'm called to do and taking the Word of God seriously.
Yep.
Yeah. I've never read that one. I've read a lot of Lloyd-Jones. I've never read that one.
Yeah, it's really good. And particularly, if you're going into ministry, it's a must read. Yeah, it's a must read.
All right, book 4 for me. I don't have a physical copy. I loaned it out, and so I have read the book. So,
Jack, you're working real hard to convince us here. I don't know.
Own it?
I've read it. I swear.
Read it? No.
So I'm going to hold my hand up like this, and maybe in the video, like
there you
go. Or whatever.
To Photoshop it in.
Yeah. The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul. That book the first time I read it, it just blew my mind. The way, like, I can still, and if you're not even a big reader, I think you can go get the lectures on Ligonier.com. Just go listen to them. The book is basically a summary, a more in-depth study of those lectures. But my goodness, that book! I think I've read it 4 or 5 times. I've done Bible studies through it. I don't know, something about the book and the doctrine of God and how it brings out the holiness of God. It just changed me as a Christian. Like, it made me, not that I didn't take God serious before, but it made me truly understand. Like, I think he really dives into that Isaiah 6 text, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a whole exposition on that, but I never read the Bible the same way after that book. The things of God and the reverence for God and the significance of who God is and the person and the holiness of God. Like, after I read that book, it was like, I can't take this lightly. Like, it added a seriousness to my faith that I didn't have. Not that it wasn't there ever, but it stirred that within me. And I don't know, it was a life-changing book for me in that sense.
I've heard a lot of people say that book was like the gateway drug to reformed, like the reformed world and reformed reading for them. I mean, I've heard that several times. I don't know if that was the case for you or not, Jay.
I was already reformed-ish. Like, I was a relatively new Christian, but I would have called myself a Calvinist. But the bigness and greatness of God just truly hadn't captivated me yet. Like, the Lord is stirring that in my heart. The Lord used that book to really change that. So I mean, strongly recommend. He's very approachable book. And it's some of these books we've mentioned that were written, 300 plus years ago, whatever. This book was written, 30, 40 years ago?
Right.
Yeah. Very readable, very, very readable, and just an incredibly powerful book, The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul.
Right. What are we on? 4? Book number 4 for me. One of the most impacting for me of all books I've read in way of Christian living, in particular, has been Donald Whitney's Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life.
That's a great book.
The kind of the premise that he lays out is that there's lots of things that Christians feel like they should be doing, and that there's so many things that it can actually be overwhelming, and it can drown out the things that we're actually supposed to be doing. And so what he does is he goes through Scripture and he says, okay, these are the specific disciplines that Christians are commanded to do. And when you get like those 12 to 14, I think in the revised one, there's a couple of additions. But when you get the focused view of Scripture reading and prayer and worship and serving and evangelism and these things, and he puts it so beautifully and clearly, and it is thoroughly biblical. When I saw that, it actually helped in my Christian walk and Christian living. It actually helped every area, I think. There was no area that was left untouched just by seeing, okay, what has God said is required of us. And it actually helped cut out things that I thought maybe were disciplines or things I was supposed to be doing that I wasn't doing, that aren't even really things that were commanded. So, so that's a really good one. And then there's also, this is like the old edition of it. There's a new edition of it, and there's a workbook too. So if you really want to work through something like devotionally, they make a really great. It makes a really great small group kind of study as well. And so, Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life, fantastic one. Yeah. And the original foreword was from J.I. Packer, and J.I. Packer said it's one of the best books that he's read on the subject. So, if the word of Pac-Man means anything to you.
I like Whitney altogether. I think he's just anything he writes in terms of spiritual disciplines, especially is gold. I mean, that's the praying through the Bible, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, which is another life-changing one, for sure. Yeah. All right, last
Grayson,
book, Grayson.
One more.
All right.
Make it a good one for us.
So this is one that don't know if you guys have ever heard of as well. It's called The Cross and Salvation by Bruce Damaris.
Nope.
So it was put out by Crossway as far as it's a biblical theology series. They go through theology proper, pneumatology, ecclesiology, all that kind of stuff. And this one's on Christology. So doctrine of salvation in particular within that. So what it does is it traces, first off, kind of like a historical development of the theology, and then it'll also break out into the major religious beliefs of our day, at least ones that affect us as Protestants. So you'll see him trace out what does a Roman Catholic believe, and what does a liberal Protestant believe, what does Presbyterianism hold to, Lutheranism, Baptist, whatever the case might be, for at least those main subsets in each chapter. But he talks about things in terms of the extent of the atonement. So when you get to things like that, if you're looking for something that gives you at least an idea what the different viewpoints are in a helpful but clear, concise way, and then what I would argue is biblically right, then he does that, and then the remaining half of the chapter. So each chapter, he'll go through that exact same framework. It's edited by a guy named John Feinberg, phenomenal guy. John Feinberg's another name that few people actually know of, but he's one of the most influential guys that's affected many of your other top guys in evangelicalism, as far as your faithful scholars.
Did Rick Warren train him?
No.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
No. Oh,
yeah.
So
he's got that going for him too.
You're thinking of Jeremiah Burroughs, the Rick Warren trained.
Right, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
But the reason I chose it is not just because it's a really helpful book in those regards. I'm just blowing right past it.
Yeah.
But you stopped to take notice of it though. So
yeah,
you didn't get out unscathed, Grayson.
Jack's talking again.
No, not entirely. I never can.
No, I have to say something.
The reason I picked it though is because it's written at a lay level, but it is a more theologically dense book on salvation. And we've taught it a number of times at our church, and I've just found people that have been helped by it immensely so. Because a lot of people will read the first chapter, and they're like, oh, or not the first chapter, but the first part of it dealing with everybody's wacky beliefs, right? And I don't mean Presbyterians and Lutherans and all that within that, because most part they're going to be Orthodox, but it'll trace, again, liberalism and Roman Catholicism, things we disagree with in massive ways. They'll get confused in that portion, and they'll get swayed by other arguments, and then as we get to the second part, they're like, okay, so here's what I thought was actually true all along, or perhaps I didn't quite understand the shade of that doctrine on Christ's substitutionary atonement. So they're able to then learn and say, okay, so when I'm talking with my Roman Catholic friends and they're denying things like original sin, or they might use that term and say we affirm it, but it means a radically different thing for them, they now have terminology they can go back with in their evangelistic discussions and their friendships and family members. So it's profoundly helpful. But he's also just a good author. I mean, he's coming from a Calvinistic background, so heads up, obviously, if you're going to pick it up, know that. But I found it to be just a good book.
What was the name of it again? Can you say it again?
Excuse me. The Cross and Salvation by Bruce Demarest.
Okay.
This guy.
That's good. Yeah, I'll have to pick that one up. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's the one that's thicker. It's like 400 and some odd pages, close to 5, but yeah.
Just kidding. It's fine. I like long books. Yeah, good recommendation, Grayson. Thank you. So my last book is a book I've not had long, but I can't even get through it. It's the Encyclopedia of Southern Baptist. It's really not. I was going to say, I started to bray. I was trying to not laugh, but it was...
I actually had no idea where you were going with that.
I shouldn't have laughed. Man, I couldn't keep it together. I was going to say, it's a book I've not had long, but it's a book that's really helped me understand my relationships around me. And,
right.
No, that is a book I will never read. I bought it for other people. Sometime I'll share the story about that.
We'll have the
So
guy
this book,
the guy that wrote it's listening to it like, oh man,
You guys are really
what a blow. He's
you
like,
guys
man.
are really raking me over the coals right now.
So the last book, I did break character a little bit. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Not a theological book, but I wanted some variety in there. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I read it.
If you have
every
to
couple
pick,
years.
if you have to pick a non-theological work,
I can think of another, like Lewis wrote some pretty good stuff.
get
I
out
like
of
the
here.
space trilogy.
Get out of here.
So I actually thought about that. So the space trilogy, it's picked up relevance recently because people are thinking about our current, political situation.
Because they're thinking of space.
Well, the Hideous Strength. If you've never read that one, it's the third book in the space trilogy.
Abolition of Man was basically written off of that one. So if you've read that one,
yeah, I read it 2 or 3 years ago.
It's version.
It's pretty insightful. It's he's basically explaining how evil will work through corporations and politically just try and overthrow goodness. It's an interesting book.
So I did early on in my Christian life, I did read like the Screw Tape letters. And I thought like, ooh, this is spooky and good. Like I did, but it's been so long since I've read it. And then a few years ago, people were saying, you got to read Chronicles of Narnia because I had never read it. And I did not like it. And to be fair, I do remember I had reread because I've read them several times. I had reread Lord of the Rings, and then somebody said, "Oh, you should read Chronicles of Narnia." And so when you come off of Lord of the Rings,
they're totally
and then like Santa Claus is showing up for some reason, it's like, no, I don't like this at all, actually. But I powered through and I read all of them, and I think that a lot of people are just nostalgic about them.
Probably. It's a children's book, right?
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, though, to go back to my fifth pick, because I do think this is
I guess we're done talking about C.S. Lewis.
You know what book C.S. Lewis is not in? Encyclopedias. Anyway,
true.
Lord of the Rings, I don't need to say a lot. It's so well known. I mean, it's just incredible. Such an incredible story. The Christian themes and ideals are just pregnant within the book. There's such beautiful imagery. It's just deep. I mean, it's just an incredible. It's famous for a reason, right?
Yep.
Right.
So.
One of the beautiful things about that book is the good characters are good and the wicked characters are wicked.
Yes.
Yep.
And there's none of this modern trying to, oh, well, he's bad, but he's just misunderstood. I hate that so much. Yeah.
I mean, like Rings of Power.
Yeah, exactly. And you can listen to the Rings of Power bonus episode that those guys did. Yeah. My fifth book, closing down, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. No, just kidding, not really. Jack, did you get a little nervous there? No, so my last one, and this is, again, another very impacting book. A lot of times when we think about sin, we think about things like murder, adultery, lying, theft, those kinds of things. The book by Jerry Bridges, Respectable Sins.
Yep.
Okay, Respectable Sins, confronting the sins that we tolerate. Again, absolutely rocked my world because there's these little, what he puts forward is that there's these little pet sins that we say, well, it's not that big of a deal, or we excuse them away, when actually Scripture says that they are a very, very big deal. I'll just quickly here, I'll just read you some of the chapters here. So he starts off, I'll read you the contents, not the chapters. Chapter 1.
It's turned into an audiobook.
This is now an audiobook of Jerry Bridges. But he talks about, the how serious sin is, obviously, to begin with. And then he says, so like chapter 7, for example, ungodliness, anxiety and frustration, discontentment, unthankfulness, pride, selfishness, lack of self-control, impatience and irritability, anger. Then he goes and then he expounds upon that with the weeds of anger, is what he calls it. Judgmentalism, envy, jealousy, and related sins, sins of the tongue, and worldliness. And again, this book, it's very approachable. It's got a study with it as well that you can do. And if you really want to dig deep, like if you want to break up some fallow ground in your heart, Respectable Sins is a really, really good book for that.
Yeah. No, I remember when I read that book, it tore me apart in all the right ways.
Right. Yeah, because he doesn't just beat
really
you up.
well.
Yeah,
No,
he doesn't
not
just
at
beat
all.
you up. It's a here's the problem. Now let's see this sin conquered. And of course, a good book will make you more mindful, Yeah. And so when you read about worldliness, then inevitably you're going to be more mindful of worldliness in your own life, And so it's really good book.
Yeah. That's good. So one honorable mention I'll toss out there. I don't know if you guys want to do an honorable mention. It's kind of like
I'll do an
6
honorable
books.
mention. Yes.
Yeah, we'll do an honorable mention. It's just kind of for fun. I won't say a lot, but Valley of Vision, I had it on my list. I took it off my list. I had it on my list. It's a collection of Puritan prayers. It's not, maybe not one that I'd force every Christian to read, but it's a book every Christian should have, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If I could do that, because it's one that you want to pull up at appropriate times. And you open it up and you look in the table of contents, and it's got, prayers for specific needs. So if you're struggling with something, if there's a significant event, if something is happening, you can flip to that prayer, and it's just wonderful meditations for the heart. So again, maybe not one that I would say every Christian should read, although it wouldn't hurt by any means. One that you should have and be able to reference in, when appropriate.
Definitely. You know what we didn't preface this whole conversation with? That when we were talking about picking these 5 books, we did say the Bible can't be one of them. So this whole time, somebody's been listening for like 47 minutes. None of these guys are going to say the Bible. Not one of them. Yeah. Do you have an honorable mention, Grayson? Or
I do. Augustine's
you can't say the Bible,
Confessions.
Oh, yeah.
What'd you say? Augustine's Confessions?
Can you imagine doing the Bible as an honorable mention at the end? Like, it's like
it's worse than not doing it.
This didn't quite make the top 5 here.
Yeah, that's
a little long.
A visceral
it's
reaction
a little long. Yeah,
for me. No,
I just got a little gaggy just then. Yeah.
Sorry, I threw up a little bit in my mouth.
right.
Augustine's Confessions. It's just, again, not one I think I'd force everybody to read, but it's incredibly, it's a wonderful coming of faith story with St. Augustine, or if you call him Augustine, however you pronounce his name, whatever. I read it when I was maybe 2 years into being a Christian, and then I read it again in seminary. But it's incredibly relatable, because here you have a weighty figure in all of church history who had a very rebellious childhood and got smacked upside the head by God at different points and came to faith in kind of a shocking way. And for me, I had a shocking testimony. So I'm like, okay, so here's a guy that was, influential in the church and had a very sordid past. So I actually am forgiven, right?
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'm like, so I can still do something for the kingdom. Cool.
Yeah. I've actually never read that. That's one I've never read. I've just never gotten around to it. Have you read it, Blake?
Yeah, a couple times.
I'm well aware of it. I've just never sat down and done it.
It's an easy read. Right. I mean, it's an autobiography, basically.
Yeah. He does get a little, I don't know. He does get a little poetic, So it's not like a modern read, but if you're used to reading old stuff, it's definitely approachable.
Yep.
Yeah, great, but a great book. Yeah. So here's my honorable mention. Okay. We're well aware of the sin of laziness, right? And what a major problem it is. But we don't often think about the sin of being overly busy. And so there's this little book. In fact, it's called A Mercifully Short Book About a Really Big Problem. Crazy Busy by Kevin DeYoung. And it is a very short little book. And essentially, we are probably the most overstimulated, overstrung out, overscheduled people that have ever lived. Like by and large, there's so many things pulling for our attention, and it's hard to find the balance of the best things in life, the things that you're supposed to be doing, and emptying your schedule out for the things that are right. Now, the nice thing is this is not just a bunch of time management tips. There's biblical principle to actually get to the heart of being overly busy. One of the things that Kevin DeYoung asks in the book that I actually have written in the front cover, because it was just a really impacting thing, was to ask the question, am I trying to do good or make myself look good? You know, with being overly busy and overscheduled. I mean, how many times is that a pertinent question? You know, there's helpful reminders in there that, like, Jesus didn't do Jesus didn't do it all, like in his earthly life. Like, there were people that were following after him to be healed, and he went across and went to another town, you know. I mean, he wasn't, you know, he knew when to pull away and pray and when to rest and when to do all those things. He was busy, but he wasn't sinfully busy. And so that's a really great, I think, a good honorable mention. There's a little companion book that's not meant to be a companion book that goes with this. Second honorable mention, I guess. I don't have it with me right now. No, no, Crazy Busy. And then Tim Challies wrote a book called Crazy Lazy, which is kind of the other side of laziness. So, you know, if you get those two little books, they kind of address both issues. So,
perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
We need to make that meme with just those two books on either side of the little thing. Of the little purple fella. What's his name? Grimace?
I don't watch Marvel movies.
I know. I honestly can't remember what the guy's name is.
Thanos?
Oh, yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it.
I don't even know how to pronounce it. I've never heard it said.
Yeah.
I've just seen it.
Somebody, Heath is like, ugh.
And everyone listening is like, who's Heath?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to our little bonus episode here of 5 books that we wish we could force every Christian to read. We will be back very, very soon with the next episode, the next formal episode of season 2. And it will be called Ministering to Your Unsaved or Lukewarm Spouse. Yeah. And as a reminder, we're working through common struggles of the Christian life. And before we took our break, we touched on biblical masculinity and biblical femininity. And as we were discussing these issues, this topic kind of birthed itself. Like, how do you deal with this situation when you're close to someone, in this case, a spouse, who isn't living out or trying to live out the true biblical definitions of femininity or masculinity? So we will be back soon with that episode. Anything else, guys?
Nope, that's all I got.
No.
Okay.
One more.
Thanks so much for
Baptist Encyclopedia.
Yes. Please, somebody take this.
So
for one small payment of $19.95.
Yeah, so it's a 2-volume,
this beautifully hardbound and cardboard wrapped
2-volume set. You know, the one thing that I will say, and we can close on this box is so beaten up. I bet that guy read this all the time. Because look how beat up this is. But
he probably used it as a doorstop, Jack.